In a marble hallway at the United Nations building in New York, there is a copy of a peace treaty carved onto a bronze tablet around 1259 BC. One side is Egypt, ruled by the pharaoh Ramesses the Great. The other side is a nation called the Hittites. It is the oldest full peace treaty ever found, older than almost any law you have ever heard of. For most of the 1800s, serious historians did not believe the Hittites were real. The word only showed up in the Bible, in short lines, next to peoples nobody could find any proof of. Scholars figured it was just an old, made-up label. Then, the ground in central Turkey proved every one of them wrong. Picture a scholar in London in the 1850s, reading the Old Testament by candlelight. The book mentions Hittites again and again, trading with kings, marrying into royal families, fighting wars. But outside the Bible, there was nothing. No ruins with that name, no king lists, no coins. Egypt had left mountains of stone carvings. Babylon had left thousands of clay records. The Hittites had left silence. So a theory took hold and spread through universities. The Hittites were probably invented, a folk memory stitched together by ancient writers, the same way old maps once filled blank oceans with sea monsters. It was a tidy explanation. It was also completely wrong. And the proof was already sitting in a hillside in Turkey, waiting to be dug up. Through the rest of the 1800s, archaeology in the Middle East was booming. Diggers were pulling whole cities out of the sand in Egypt and Iraq, reading their writing, naming their kings. Every big civilization from the Bible seemed to be turning up in the dirt, one after another, except this one. Some travelers in Turkey did report strange carved stones near a village called Bogazkale, covered in a script nobody recognized. Pictures of tiny men, sharp symbols, rows of unreadable marks. Most experts filed the carvings away as decoration, not writing, and moved on. A whole century went by like this. Real evidence sitting in plain sight, and almost nobody willing to connect it to a nation they had already decided was made up. Now, meet the figure who will guide us through the rest of this story, a stonecutter named Enna. He is not a real historical person we can name. Think of him instead as a stand-in for every ordinary craftsman who worked in these vanished cities, pressing symbols into wet clay, carving stone gateways, watching kings come and go. Somewhere near Bogazkale, workers like Enna spent their whole lives writing records nobody outside their own walls could read. Grain counts, court rulings, letters to distant kings. None of it was made for us. It was made to be read by the next clerk down the hall. That is what makes what happened next, when the silence finally broke, so strange. In 1906, a German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler started digging seriously at that hillside near Bogazkale. What he found stopped him cold. Buried under the ruins of a huge ancient city was a room, then another room, then another, packed with clay tablets. Tens of thousands of them, pressed with the same wedge-shaped writing used across the ancient Middle East, called cuneiform. This was the strangest object of the whole story. An entire government archive, still sitting where it was left, in a language nobody alive could read. The city itself turned out to be enormous, with stone walls stretching for miles. Whoever had lived here had clearly been powerful. The tablets just needed someone to unlock them. That someone was a Czech linguist named Bedřich Hrozný, working through the tablets during the First World War. In 1915, he announced something nobody expected. The language was not some isolated local tongue. It belonged to the same family as Latin, Greek, and eventually English, a family called Indo-European. In fact, this was the oldest written Indo-European language ever found, centuries older than anything else in that family. It is a little like discovering that a grandparent's diary, written in a scribble nobody could read, turns out to share a grammar with the language you speak every day. The people the Bible had mentioned in passing were not a myth. They had written millions of words, and now those words were finally speaking back. Once the tablets could be read, the size of what had been found became clear. The Hittites were not a small tribe living in the shadow of Egypt. Between roughly 1650 and 1200 BC, they ran an empire that covered most of modern Turkey, ruled from that hillside capital called Hattusa. They were a genuine third superpower, standing alongside Egypt and the Kingdom of Babylon. In 1274 BC, Hittite and Egyptian armies collided near the city of Kadesh, in modern Syria. It may have been the largest chariot battle in history. Thousands of chariots crashing together in the dust. Neither side crushed the other. Years later, exhausted, they signed that same peace treaty, now sitting quietly in New York. The Hittites were also quietly ahead of their time. Their laws, carved onto tablets that survive today, replaced many of the brutal punishments common elsewhere with fines instead, a kind of ancient insurance system for accidents and crimes. Queen Puduhepa, wife of King Hattusili III, signed the Kadesh Treaty herself and ran diplomacy with Egypt in her own name. Unusual power for a woman in that era. The Hittites were also among the earliest people working with iron, centuries before the wider Iron Age began, though historians still argue how much of a secret it really was. Put together, this was a sophisticated, literate, technologically advanced state, which makes what happened around 1200 BC even harder to explain. The Hittites called their own homeland the land of 1,000 gods, and they meant it almost literally. When their armies conquered a new city, they did not tear down its temples or ban its gods. They copied the local god onto a tablet and welcomed it into their own official list. Storm gods, sun goddesses, mountain spirits, filed neatly side by side. The chief among them was Tarhunna, god of storms and thunder, paired with the sun goddess Ariniti, worshipped as the true ruler of the land. It is a little like a modern country folding every immigrant tradition into its own calendar instead of replacing them. That habit of collecting rather than erasing may be part of why this empire held so many peoples together for 400 years. Around 1200 BC, Hattusa was burned and abandoned, not slowly worn down over generations, but emptied out fast enough that the archive of tablets was simply left behind in the rooms where clerks had been using it. The wider Hittite Empire, stretching across Turkey and into Syria, collapsed within a matter of decades. This is the open question at the center of this whole story. A superpower that had stood for 400 years, that fought Egypt to a standstill, that ran one of the most advanced governments of the Bronze Age, came apart so completely that people forgot it had ever existed. Historians still do not agree on exactly why. There are 3 main answers, and none of them has fully won. The first answer involves a mysterious group Egyptian records call the Sea Peoples. Around 1200 BC, waves of raiders, possibly displaced by chaos elsewhere, swept across the eastern Mediterranean by ship. Egyptian inscriptions describe them attacking coastal cities and even Egypt itself. Several other Bronze Age states in the region fell around the same years, and some historians think these raiders played a direct role in Hattusa's fall too, cutting off trade routes and attacking Hittite territory from outside. The trouble is that no Hittite record clearly names an enemy walking through the capital's gates. The city burned, but who set the fire, and whether it was even the main cause, is something the evidence does not settle. The second answer comes from tree rings and pollen buried in ancient lake mud, not from any king's inscription. Scientists studying these natural records have found signs of a severe, long drought across Anatolia, right around the time Hattusa fell. Letters from the very end of the Hittite archive beg allied kings for emergency shipments of grain, language that sounds almost like a modern disaster relief request. A kingdom that depended on regular harvests to feed its army and its cities could have been pushed past its limit by years of failed crops, weakened long before any invader arrived. It is a quieter explanation than raiders and burning ships, but the climate evidence for it is some of the strongest physical proof we have from this period. The third answer looks inward, at the empire's own structure. The Hittite state ruled through a web of vassal kings and local governors, all loyal to Hattusa, all trading grain, metal, and goods along shared routes across the eastern Mediterranean. A shipwreck found off the Turkish coast at Uluburun shows just how connected that Bronze Age trade network really was, carrying cargo from a dozen different regions on one ship. Some historians argue that once one part of that connected system failed, whether from drought, raiders, or internal revolt, the whole network could have come apart at once, the way a single broken link can jam an entire modern supply chain. Losing one link may have been enough to bring the rest down with it. Here is the honest part. Nobody studying the Hittites today claims to know for certain which of these answers is correct, or whether it was really all three arriving together. There is no single tablet that says exactly what happened in Hattusa's final days, because whoever was there did not stop to write it down, or that final record simply has not survived. Archaeologists keep finding new drought data, new burned layers, new debated inscriptions, and the argument keeps shifting instead of closing. That uncertainty is not a gap in the story. It is the honest shape of history itself, built from broken pieces rather than a clean, finished picture. And the Hittites remain one of its most stubborn, unanswered cases. And here is the strangest final twist. The very fire that destroyed Hattusa and ended the Hittite Empire is the reason we can read any of this today. Clay tablets left out in the open normally crumble back to dust within a few centuries, worn away by rain and time. But when Hattusa burned, the intense heat baked those clay tablets hard, almost like pottery in a kiln, sealing the writing into them permanently. The disaster that erased a superpower from the map also accidentally fired its own memory into something close to stone. Somewhere under that quiet hillside in Turkey, thousands more tablets may still be sitting exactly where the fire left them, still unread. More forgotten history every week. Subscribe so it isn't lost twice.